Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Really excited about this webinar. I think we booked an hour for this one. Probably only going to need the 25 minutes, 30 minutes. So should be able to give you a bit of time back in your day. I can see a ton of people still joining the webinar. So I'm just probably going to give it another 15, 20 seconds and then we'll get started. But yeah, really excited about this one. We've been kind of cooking this up for a little while now. Lots and lots of people that are on our technical advisory board have been asking more and more questions about how Augmentt can help them when it comes to Microsoft security. So happy to share, this new offering that we've put together. I think it's going to be of interest to a ton of partners. And so, I think people are kind of settled in now. So I'm just going to kick off. And feel free to ask questions at any time in the chat. That's how our webinars typically operate. I'll try to monitor that, but I'll definitely make sure I get to it at the end. So like I said, probably 25 minutes is good enough for me, and then I'll leave some time for Q&A. We always record our webinars, so we'll be sending you that recording out in the next, usually the next business day. And then the Q&A box is your best way to get a hold of me. And then, like I said, I'll answer questions toward the end of the webinar. Okay, I've probably shown this slide before, but I just wanted to chat a little bit about this. You might see our chairman, Gavin Garbutt, post on LinkedIn all of the interesting stats around Microsoft security. I'd say we've seen a bit of a bump in some of the best practices being deployed. But we're still a very long road away from, the majority of Microsoft environments having any form of decent security. So as the costs of attacks have gone down, we've just seen more and more attacks of all different sorts. And probably the one that I'm seeing the most recently, and I'm hearing from more and more partners, is MFA token theft or some form of adversary in the middle. And that's essentially where they install a Trojan or spyware or something to outright steal the MFA token that's stored locally on the user's device, or they're tricking the user through a phishing email, through a suspicious URL, to a landing page that looks like a valid Microsoft sign-in page, and the user is actually entering their credentials. They're stealing those credentials, and then when they get challenged for MFA and the user puts in that MFA token, the MFA token is then passed to the bad guys, and the bad guys can now sign in. They have your username and password, and they have your MFA token. So these things are on the rise, and there's a couple, I would say the vast majority of these attacks can be prevented. Microsoft has some pretty good best practice documentation out there. We released an ebook, I think it was a month or two ago, that essentially said, do these 5 things to prevent 99% of breaches. And it's funny because, normally an enterprise company like Microsoft that has, teams after teams of lawyers would never put out big statements like, do this and you'll block 99 or 99.9%. But it really is not that complicated to lock down a Microsoft environment. The remaining 1% of issues, because again, we can't prevent everything, is going to be things like the phishing attacks that are successful, or the MFA token theft because the user actually goes ahead and agrees to install some malware of some sort. So we're never going to prevent everything, but the goal of this webinar and the goal of this managed service that we're going to talk about is how do we get to that 99% prevention rate? And we really do think that's attainable. There's just a lot of challenges and hurdles that face the average MSP. So when we look at, security configuration, if this is a service that MSPs are going to offer, I just wanted to clarify, we're talking about the technicians that do the compliance against the Microsoft environment. They do the hardening, the policies, the actual configuration. We're not going to be talking about the SOC or the help desk. Those are 2 other functions that I think are very important to an MSP. But just when it comes to locking down a Microsoft environment, the things that we've definitely heard from our partners is it's hard to staff these roles. It's hard to find someone who has the right amount of Microsoft expertise that is affordable, or if we're hiring a more junior person and we want to level them up or train them into that role, that can take time, it can be expensive. And so all of these kind of factor together into it is hard to build a managed security service around configuring Microsoft. I might have a decent person with the company today, but if they left tomorrow, I'd completely lose that skill set. Or maybe I never even got to that point where I do have one or two or a few people trained up to a level that I could just have them run free and take over conditional access policies and writing all of those security policies in the Microsoft environment. So the idea with a managed offering to offset some of the challenges here is that Augmentt eats, sleeps, and breathes Microsoft security. So we could be the dedicated team that does all of this work. We know what we're doing. We know those best practices to apply. I have today 3 Microsoft MVPs. These are the professionals that are non-Microsoft employees typically that are experts in Microsoft, and Microsoft gives them that MVP badge. So we have 3 that are actually security MVPs. All they do is be experts in Microsoft security. So we consult with them, we build best practices, and we know what we're doing. And the idea here is that if we could do that at scale, it would actually be more cost effective than an MSP building this in-house. So I'll walk you through some of the math, and I don't want to dwell on this too much because it's super easy to change the number of seats, the dollar per seat, the hourly wage, or the salary of the employee. But just follow me along with some rough numbers. The idea here is that on the left, let's say I build a managed security practice where I have 1,000 seats total under management. I think I could charge my customer $10 a user for that managed service. That nets me $10,000 a month or $120,000 a year. That's a pretty good line of business. The challenge comes with the expenses. And so using very simple math, I didn't want to use minimum wage or anything too low because you're probably not going to have a minimum wage technician doing this security service for you. So let's use $30 an hour. You could modify those numbers if you wanted. But the idea is that I have a salaried employee. In this case, I'm paying them $60,000 a year. I have the cost of the tools that I use. So call that $1 per end user. My total cost all in would be $72,000 a year. And all of that math, it can work out, and we can even scale that service, and that could become a pretty profitable offering if you were to grow the scale. The challenge for the average MSP is just getting started. What happens when I've only sold 2 of my customers and maybe a couple hundred seats under management? The problem is I have all of the expenses that are on the right, and I don't have all of the revenue yet on the left. And so in this model, I'd have to sell over 700 seats to break even on cost. Then all of the seats on top of that would be profitable. So this is the challenge. And we've been talking to lots of MSP business owners about this. You don't have to be any particular size of an organization. I've talked to MSPs that are 30 employees, and they probably have the staff in-house that they could dedicate. They're just choosing not to. It's not core to their strategy, and those people have other projects, and it's just not something they want to do right now. But if someone else could have the service all nicely done up with a bow, and they could just go pitch it and close the deal, that sounds really appealing. So I want to talk a little bit more about what that would look like. I kind of, jokingly talk about this as, having a security expert in your pocket. But really what it boils down to is whatever an MSP is doing today, you're trying to train somebody internally who has to somehow be an expert in 20 different MSP tools, and they have to be able to answer any question for any tool, for any customer environment. And that's just a really tricky job. And we know Microsoft, they're changing things all the time. The security landscape is moving. And so the idea here is rather than you trying to staff and train and improve on that, Augmentt could be that for you. And so if we could help deploy security to new tenants, We would apply the best practices, make sure that they're still applied, because this is an ongoing service. This isn't just a one and done. We've hardened a Microsoft environment. Now let's just leave it alone forever. Monitoring has to be in place for any changes. And then there's a customer reporting element. So when customers ask questions or we have a sales meeting, people are going to ask questions for what is this service? What are we doing? And so we have to be able to produce those reports. So those are the two primary use cases that I wanted to walk through. Let's talk about first, how do we land a new customer onto this managed service? And when it comes to prospecting and sales reaching out to new clients, today, the sales or the account executives or the technical account managers, I've heard MSPs use different roles and terminology. Those people are reaching out to somebody inside your organization today to ask for, hey, I want to go prospect this new customer. What do I do? And we would just have a nice streamlined service where any sales rep just pings Augmentt and says, hey, I want to prospect this client. We would go generate a brand new integration link. That's the magic link that's in the platform. The sales rep could send it to the client. Once the client approves that integration, we would monitor that to know when the integration is done. Once it's done, Augmentt quickly collects all of that security assessment data, and then we will send that to the sales rep with some talking points. So we can actually look at the threat report and say, hey, look at this user's account. Pay attention to the map over here, pay attention to this information. And that gives that sales rep some talking points for going into the meeting. And I would say, this isn't anything crazy revolutionary. This is what every MSP could be doing today. It's just hard to get somebody internally dedicated to that function. And sales needs to move fast. They need that link. They need to be able to send that report quickly to a client. The faster you move, if you can move faster than the MSP down the road who's also doing a security assessment, makes you look better, gives you a stronger footing to win that deal. So being quick here is very important. And then what if the client asks 18 questions about security and best practices and all of that? I don't think any client today is expecting the sales rep to have all of those answers in their back pocket. Sales reps usually say, I'll go talk to the technical team and we'll get back to you with some answers. Well, they could actually just directly ping all of those questions over to Augmentt, and we would send back all of the answers to all of that. And we could even dig further into the security data. And again, all of this just helps you, the MSP, put your best foot forward with that client and win that deal. So I think very interesting from a new customer acquisition perspective to help you win the business. But I would say that's not the core part of the service. That, to me, is the icing on the cake. The idea of this managed security service is, how do we harden a Microsoft environment? What compliance standard are we trying to match to? And how do we keep that client safe on an ongoing basis? So I've broken that kind of into 3 buckets. There's definitely an initial hardening project. And so this is where we would sit down with you to define the requirements. Now, let's say in a perfect world, you waved a magic wand and you had 100 clients tomorrow that needed to be all locked down and configured. We would meet with you to discuss which clients, what's most important, which security baseline templates or what standards are we trying to meet in these client environments. And we would bake out a whole rollout plan with you. Then what we have to do is we're going to snapshot the current configuration. You need to have a before and after. And then we will do the work of actually locking down all the security settings, creating the conditional access policies, deploying all of the best practices, and then notifying you when it's done and providing the report. So that way you have your before report, you have your after report. If you want to send that on to the customer, you can send it right then and there. Or maybe you want to wait until your next interim meeting that you're having with them. Then I'd say the next step, which is equally important, it's not good enough to lock your doors and close your windows once. You wouldn't go on vacation for 6 months and just lock your doors once and then hope they're okay. You'd probably send a friend around or have a security system monitoring the home. So once we've locked things down, Augmentt will actually do the monitoring on the customer environment. So let's say that, we're trying to match the Microsoft Secure Score at a certain level. We're trying to get some NIST or CIS compliance in place. Or let's say there's an Augmentt security baseline that we want to make sure is still applied. We'll actually do the monitoring for that. And if we detect any change, we're going to notify you, hey, this thing has changed. And you might say, yep, we were in there tinkering yesterday. The client no longer cares about this setting. Or, yeah, we were just changing a conditional access policy. If you say that's the way you want it to be, we'll take note of that. That becomes the new golden standard. And then we'll just document that. If you don't want that change to happen, let's say it's bad guys or someone was in there and accidentally broke something, we'll re-baseline it for you, document that, and then we'll send you a new report confirming that the work is done. So this to me is kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today. Is defining what security compliance standard you want is a pain in the butt. We'll help you do that. Doing the work of it can be a pain. Monitoring for any changes is definitely a huge pain and can take a lot of time. So that's really the meat and potatoes, like I said, of what we're talking about here. And then, as always, let's say you end up sending a report to a client, or it doesn't matter, a client reads an article on the internet or they pick up a magazine. They're like, hey, what does this mean? I just read about such and such Microsoft security best practice. We're there, as always, your security expert in your pocket to answer all of those client questions. And so what all that means is you don't need anybody inside the building to do the work, to be an expert on Microsoft, or really to do any of that monitoring on an ongoing basis. We just take all of that labor off of your hands. And that kind of puts you in a nice position where you can now go and just easily pitch this to any one of your clients anywhere that you go. I would say, I just have a couple more slides, and then I see a couple of questions in the Q&A popping up. We're in the business of building tools for MSPs, so I'd say it was surprising to me how much of our partners were asking us to go beyond building the tool and to go into actually doing some of the service. But if you look at the way things were before we built the Augmentt platform, MSPs were just using the Microsoft portal. Technically, the Microsoft portal lets you do most of what you need to do. The problem is you have to do it manually. You have to repeat it in every single portal. Then there's almost no monitoring that exists, or reporting for that matter, to help an MSP do it as a service. So introducing kind of Augmentt, what we saw was, previously a technician could manage a little over 100 end users. With Augmentt, we've definitely gotten many testimonials that are in the 3 to 5x efficiency range. So that brings the ability of a technician to support 100 users up to 300, all the way up to 500. When we think about introducing Augmentt, and Augmentt using all of its tools, leveraging our security MVPs, and all of the expertise that we have, now we're talking about thousands of end users per MSP employee. So that could mean, a one-man MSP could now go sell a managed service like this to thousands of end users without having any internal staff. And that just becomes really compelling. I don't think people are going to revolutionize their entire practice over this, but just to give you a sense of the scale of what this lets you do. And the reason that's possible is because we can be the specialist while you be the generalist, or more general, because you have so many tools and so many service offerings to end up delivering to your client. So I'd say kind of at the end of the day, when we go back to that analogy, if the end customer is paying $10, $9, $8, $7, it doesn't really matter, because the pricing structure that we're going to work out with you, and of course volume discounts would apply, but the idea is we're managing security for so many end users that you adding 50 more or 100 more or 1,000 more is not a lot to add on to our service. And so even from the very first seat that you sell, you can be profitable. And so that I think is what makes it really compelling at the end of the day, is just going to market with a service offering, having next to no overhead on your part, and not struggling with any of that. And now those clients who wanted a slightly more advanced security service, or they had those complicated questions, we can back you up in the sales meeting. We can actually do all of the work of deploying the best practices, monitoring those best practices, and then delivering those reports on a monthly, quarterly, or whatever schedule that you wanted to get those over to your client. And so I just think that's really compelling, because not all of your clients today are going to want to adopt a security hardening or a compliance as a service, but there's definitely some of them. And maybe there's an RFP or a bid where people were looking specifically for this, and now you know that you can go to market with that offering because Augment's got your back. Like I said, we're really excited about this. I think it's going to be, a great. I think it really just fills a hole. A lot of MSPs, they want to do some form of security and monitoring for all of their clients. Not every client on the planet, like somebody said, is going to be willing to pay for a premium service, but some are. And so this is where, when we go to those clients, and we've talked about this in the past, but the people who do have deeper pockets are the dentist office, the law firms, and I just generally think of it, if the average employee is getting paid six figures, that's a high-value client with deeper pockets. If it's a marketing agency that's using, contractors and part-time labor, or a coffee shop, or, anywhere that has minimum wage, retail, that's just going to be a bigger struggle to sell a premium security service. So, pick and choose and start with your better clients, and really looking forward to the feedback that we're going to get on our calls. And we'll work with you to kind of come up with a targeted plan to go to market and kind of tackle some of your higher value clients. Okay, everybody, like I said, the webinar is being recorded. We'll be sending out that recording hopefully in about 24 hours. And if you have any questions, the QR code is there. That link is in the chat. And just book some time with us. We'd love to hear, the use cases that you're thinking of, the clients that you're thinking of targeting, and see if we can help you go to market with this offering. Appreciate it, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.